My mother was mid-toast, champagne raised, telling the whole backyard that this family had never once needed anybody outside it to make things right. When the doorbell rang, she kept smiling for exactly 4 more seconds. I counted them, the way I count everything when the ground is about to move. Then the man at the door said my name instead of hers, and asked her to step aside so he could hand the papers directly to Eli's mother. He was looking straight at me. Welcome to Betrayal and Justice, where ordinary families collide with the truth and the quiet ones win. My name is Nora Vanessa. I'm 36. For the last 11 years, I've worked as a family law paralegal in Richmond, Virginia, which means I have read more adoption files, more custody orders, and more relinquishment paperwork than almost anyone else at my firm, including, as it turns out, my own. I have to take you back 17 years, to the spring I turned 19, because that's when my parents decided who I was allowed to be to my own son, and it took me until this year to finally decide they didn't get to keep deciding that. I grew up in Millbrook, North Carolina, in a house where my mother, Vivian, ran every room the way other people run a business, efficiently, cheerfully, and with a clear sense of who owed her what. My father, Walt, sold insurance and kept the peace by rarely disagreeing with her out loud. She ran the Women's Auxiliary at First Baptist for 11 years running, and there wasn't a covered dish supper or hospital visit in 3 counties that happened without her name attached to the sign-up sheet somewhere near the top. People in Millbrook trusted Vivian Vanessa's judgment on nearly everything, which made it very easy for her to trust it a little too much herself. My sister Claire was 4 years older than me, married at 24 to a good, steady man named Grant, and for 6 of those years, the 2 of them tried to have a baby. 2 miscarriages, 3 rounds of IVF that didn't take, a nursery Claire had painted a soft yellow that sat empty long enough that she eventually repainted it back to white, because yellow, she told me once, had started to feel like a taunt. I remember visiting her that spring before I got pregnant myself, finding her sitting on the floor of that repainted nursery, folding and refolding a single onesie she'd bought optimistically 2 years earlier and never had the heart to return to the store. She looked up at me and said, "I don't know how much longer I can keep hoping and be wrong." And I didn't have anything true enough to say back to her. I didn't know yet that my mother had been listening to variations of that same sentence for 6 years, and had already, quietly, started looking for a way to solve it. I was 19, in my first year at the community college, dating a guy named Tyler Reyes, who worked at his uncle's auto shop, and made me laugh so hard in the school parking lot that I once had to sit down on the curb. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday in March, in a gas station bathroom, and I remember sitting on the closed toilet lid for a long time doing math that didn't add up no matter how many times I ran it. Tyler did not run. I want to say that clearly, because it matters for everything that comes after. When I told him, he went quiet for a minute, and then he asked me to marry him. Not out of panic, he said, but because he'd been planning to ask anyway, and this just moved up the timeline. He had an apartment lined up 2 months later, a raise coming at the shop, a plan. It wasn't a good plan. It was a 19-year-old's plan. But it was ours, and neither of us wanted to hand it to anyone else. My mother had other math. She sat me down at the kitchen table 2 days after I told her, with my father hovering in the doorway the way he always did when Vivian had already decided something. She didn't yell. She never yelled. She just laid it out, calm and reasonable, the way you'd explain a decision that had already been made to someone who hadn't been in the room when it was. "Claire has wanted this for 6 years, Nora. You're 19. You don't even have your own apartment. This baby could save your sister's marriage, and it could save your whole future, if you let it." Then she said the sentence I would carry around for the next 17 years, the one I'd hear again in my head at strange hours for the rest of my life. "You're not ready. Claire can give him the life you can't." I told her Tyler and I were getting married. I told her we had a plan. My mother smiled the specific smile she used when she'd already won an argument and was simply waiting for you to catch up. She called Tyler's mother that same week, without telling me, and by the time I found out, she'd already told Tyler's family that a shotgun wedding between two teenagers would embarrass both families, that Tyler had no business raising a child on an auto shop wage, that the kindest thing anyone could do was let Claire and Grant give this baby the stable home two 19-year-olds couldn't. Tyler's mother, frightened of my mother's certainty, the way most people eventually were, told Tyler maybe he should give it some space. Tyler fought for 2 more weeks before my mother sat him down herself and told him that if he truly loved me, he'd want what was best for me. And what was best for me was not being a teenage mother with no money and no ring that meant anything yet. He was 20. He believed her, the way you believe adults when you're 20, and scared and everyone around you is speaking with more certainty than you feel. The night before he told me he was leaving, we sat in his truck outside the shop for 2 hours, engine off, and he kept saying he was sorry, over and over, like the word itself might undo something. Your mom said if I really loved you, I'd let you have a real chance, he told me. I don't even know what that means anymore. I just know I don't have the money to fight her on it. I didn't cry in front of him. I saved that for the drive home. He left for a job his cousin found him 3 states away before I was even 6 months along. I did not blame him for a long time. I'm not sure I fully do now, either. I blame the woman who made sure he never got a real choice. By my 6th month, my mother had stopped asking and started planning. Claire cried on the phone with me twice. Real tears. I want to be fair to her, because I don't think Claire ever understood the size of what was being taken from me to give her what she wanted. She thought I was choosing this. She thought I'd come to peace with it the way you come to peace with a hard, generous decision. She did not know my mother had told me, plainly, in April, that if I tried to keep the baby, she and my father would stop paying for school, stop letting me live at home, and stop, in her words, pretending this family can support a decision like that. I was 19, unmarried, abandoned by a family that had engineered my abandonment, and utterly out of options that didn't run through my mother's kitchen. If you've ever had a family use the word choice for something that was never actually offered to you as one, stay with me. This is going to take a while to tell right, and you're going to want to hear all of it. I gave birth on a Thursday in November, 6 days early, after 11 hours of labor with my mother in the room and Claire pacing the hallway outside because Vivian thought it would be confusing for her to be present for the delivery itself. I named him Eli before anyone told me I wasn't allowed to. Eli Thomas, after my grandfather. It's one of the only decisions from that entire year nobody managed to take away from me. Claire kept the first name. I've never known whether that was kindness or convenience, and at some point I stopped needing to know which. 2 days later, before I signed anything, a hospital social worker named Ruth Okafor came into my room alone, without my mother, because state law required it. She was maybe 50, gray at the temples, and she sat on the edge of my bed and asked me questions nobody else had bothered to ask in 6 months. Did I understand that I had a legal right to independent counsel before relinquishing parental rights? Did I understand that a family agreement, even a notarized one, was not the same as a court-finalized adoption? Did I understand that in Virginia, we'd moved my delivery to be near a specialist my mother preferred? A relinquishment only became irrevocable once a judge signed a final decree, and that decree required a formal court petition, not a private document drawn up by a notary at someone's kitchen table. I remember nodding along without really absorbing it, the way you nod at anything when you've been awake for 2 days and your whole life has just been rearranged by other people. But Ruth pressed a card into my hand before she left, her name, her direct line, and a folded pamphlet titled, Your Rights as a Birth Parent, and said, Keep this, not because I think you'll need it, because you should have it, whether you ever use it or not. I put it in the zippered pocket of my hospital bag and didn't look at it again for a long time. I did not know, in that moment, that it was the single most important piece of paper I would ever own. The agreement my mother had drawn up was handled by a notary from her church, a kind, unhurried woman named Bev Langley, who I don't believe understood the legal weight of what she was notarizing any better than I did. It was 3 pages. Voluntary Kinship Guardianship and Relinquishment Agreement. My signature. Claire and Grant's signatures. Bev's stamp. My mother told everyone, including Claire, that this made it official, that Eli was legally theirs now, full stop, the way any adoption would be. I signed it on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' dining table, 4 days after I'd left the hospital, with my milk still coming in and my mother's hand resting on my shoulder the entire time like she was steadying a table that might tip. Bev Langley asked me twice if I understood what I was signing, gently, the way you'd check on someone before a procedure, and both times I said yes, because saying no had already stopped feeling like an option available to me. Claire came to pick Eli up from the nursery the next morning, while I was still bleeding through the pads the hospital had sent home with me. And I remember standing at my parents' front window, watching her carry him to her car, thinking, with a strange, cold clarity, that I would remember the exact color of that car seat for the rest of my life. I do. It was slate gray. I moved out 8 months later, once I'd saved enough from a part-time job to afford a room above a laundromat 2 towns over. I finished my associate's degree slower than planned, then transferred to a paralegal certificate program because it was the fastest, cheapest path to a job that paid enough to never again need anyone's permission to survive. I told myself I chose family law because the hours were steady. That was a lie I told myself for almost a decade. I chose it because some part of me needed to understand, in exhausting technical detail, exactly what had been done to me, and because some smaller, more stubborn part of me suspected, long before I could prove it, that Ruth Okafor's pamphlet had been trying to tell me something my mother never wanted me to learn. I moved to Richmond at 24 for a paralegal position at a small firm, Halloway & Cho, and that's where I met Naomi, a receptionist 2 desks down who became, over the next 12 years, the closest thing I have to a sister who never once asked me to give anything up. And that's where I met Renata Cho, the firm's senior partner, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and absolutely no patience for sloppy paperwork, who would eventually become the person who helped me understand exactly what my own family had gotten wrong. For the first few years in Richmond, I kept my distance from home the way you keep your hand off a stove you've already been burned by once. I went back for Christmas, for the occasional birthday, always polite, always careful. I watched Eli grow up in photographs mostly. A toddler in Claire's arms at the county fair. A gap-toothed 6-year-old at a birthday party I wasn't invited to because my mother said too many people confused him. A solemn 10-year-old in a Halloween costume Claire had made by hand. I sent birthday cards every single year, signed the way my mother had trained the whole family to expect. Love, Aunt Nora. 4 words. I also kept his newborn hospital bracelet in the same drawer as Ruth's card, a strip of plastic with his footprint stamped in fading ink, the only physical proof I had, for 17 years, that any of it had actually been real and not something I'd simply agreed to believe. I wrote them so many times over so many years that my handwriting on that specific line became almost automatic, a kind of scar tissue. Whenever the grief showed on my face at a family gathering, and it did, more than I ever let myself admit out loud, my mother had a line ready, delivered gently, like a mint after a meal. "You made the right choice, sweetheart." She said it at his first birthday. She said it at his kindergarten graduation, which I watched from 3 rows back at Claire's polite but firm insistence that I not confuse the picture. She said it, unprompted, at Thanksgiving the year Eli turned 12, apropos of absolutely nothing, as if she could feel the grief radiating off me across the table and needed to neutralize it before anyone else noticed. The hardest one wasn't a holiday at all. It was an ordinary Tuesday when Eli was 8, and I happened to be in town for a work conference, and I stopped by unannounced to drop off a birthday gift a week early because my flight home left before his actual birthday. Claire answered the door with flour on her hands, midway through baking his favorite cake, and behind her I could hear him laughing at something on the television, a sound I didn't recognize because I had never once been in a room informal enough to hear it before. I stood on that porch for 4 minutes making conversation about nothing, handed her the gift, and drove straight to the airport instead of my hotel, because I could not make myself sit in a rental car outside that house for 1 more minute without it undoing something I'd worked very hard to keep steady. If you've ever had someone hand you a sentence like a bandage for a wound, they're the one who caused. Tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, Go ahead and subscribe, because you are going to want to see exactly how long it takes for a bandage like that to finally come off. At the firm, over those years, I built a specialty almost without meaning to. Kinship guardianship cases, the messy, informal arrangements where a grandmother or an aunt raises a child through a handshake agreement instead of a courtroom, and where, years later, someone discovers the paperwork was never actually as solid as everyone assumed. I closed a case in my 7th year at the firm involving a grandmother who'd raised her grandson for a decade under exactly the kind of private notarized agreement my own family had used, only to have it unravel when the boy's biological father resurfaced and a judge ruled the original document had never legally severed his rights. Renata handed me that file because, she said, I had a gift for reading exactly what a piece of paper did and didn't actually accomplish. The grandmother in that case, a woman named Odessa, cried in our conference room the day the ruling came down, not from relief, but from the specific shock of learning that 10 years of school pickups and packed lunches and scraped knees had never been legally hers to claim the way she'd believed. I sat across from her taking notes and thought, more than once, that I understood her confusion better than I let on. I remember sitting with that file at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, feeling something cold and clear settle into place, the same feeling I'd get years later at Eli's 18th birthday party. I did not go home and pull my own copy of Ruth Okafor's pamphlet that night. I want to be honest about that. It took me 4 more years to do that. But I started keeping a private file of my own after that case. Nothing formal, no complaint, no plan. Just facts, dated, the way I'd been trained to keep them for every other client. My son's name, the date I signed, the notary's name. Ruth Okafor's card, still tucked in the same zippered pocket, moved from bag to bag for over a decade. This past January, Claire called me on a Tuesday night, her voice higher than usual, the particular pitch of someone trying to sound casual about something that scared her. Eli's high school had a service trip to Costa Rica planned for spring, his first time out of the country, and the school needed his passport application processed within 6 weeks. Claire had pulled together his birth certificate, his social security card, and gone looking for the adoption decree number the passport office wanted listed for any child with an amended birth record. She couldn't find it. She'd called the county clerk's office in North Carolina to request a certified copy, and the clerk, after checking twice, told her there was no adoption case on file under Eli's name at all. Nothing. No docket number. No decree. No judge had ever signed anything. I'm sure it's just misfiled somewhere, Claire said, and I could hear her trying to believe it as she said it. Do you remember anything from back then? Any paperwork you might still have? I sat very still for 11 seconds before I answered her. I counted them, the same way I count everything, because counting is the only thing that keeps my hands steady when the rest of me wants to shake. 11 seconds to decide whether to tell her, right then, exactly what I already knew. That there was no decree because there had never been a court case, because Bev Langley's notary stamp on a kitchen table agreement had never once been the same thing as a judge's signature, because Ruth Okafor had tried to tell me that in a hospital room 17 years earlier, and I had simply been too young and too frightened to understand what she meant. I told Claire I'd look into it. That much, at least, was true. If you've ever watched the people who built their whole life on top of a secret suddenly realize the foundation was never actually poured, tell me in the comments. And if this story is doing what I think it's doing to your evening, hit subscribe, because Eli's birthday is coming, and you're going to want to see exactly how far this goes. I brought the whole situation to Renata the next morning, laid out plainly, the way I'd lay out any client's case, except this time my hands weren't quite as steady as they usually were when I opened a file. She listened without interrupting, the way she always does, and when I finished, she took off her glasses and said, "Nora, I think you already know what this means. I think you've known for longer than you're telling me." She wasn't wrong. She never usually is. What it meant, legally, was this: a private relinquishment agreement, however sincerely everyone involved believed in it, does not terminate a biological parent's rights in Virginia or in North Carolina. Only a court can do that, through a formal termination of parental rights proceeding and a subsequent adoption decree, with the biological parent afforded notice, independent counsel, and in most cases a defined revocation period. No such proceeding had ever happened, which meant that for 17 years, on paper, in the eyes of the law, I had never stopped being Eli's legal mother. Claire and Grant had raised him, loved him, shown up for every school play, and skinned knee for 17 years. And none of it had ever been legally theirs to claim, not in the way my mother had assured everyone it was. Renata asked me, plainly, sitting across her desk with the door closed, what I actually wanted out of any of this. Not what I was entitled to. Not what the law technically allowed. What I wanted. I sat with that question longer than I expected to. I don't want to blow up his life, I finally said. I just want it to stop being true that I don't count. Renata nodded like that was the only sane answer she'd have accepted. Then that's exactly what we'll ask the court for, she said. Nothing more and nothing less. I did not want to take my son from the only mother he had ever known. I want that understood clearly, because it matters more than anything else in this story. What I wanted, what I decided, over the following 2 months, working with Renata and a colleague she assigned to represent me properly, because representing yourself in your own case is a bad idea, even when you know the law cold, was simple. I wanted the truth on the record. I wanted a court to formally acknowledge what had actually happened, so that no one in my family could ever again tell me, with that same gentle, maddening certainty, that I had made a choice, when what I had actually made was a survival decision under a threat of losing everything at 19 years old. We filed a petition to establish parentage and correct vital records in late February. It wasn't a custody suit. It didn't ask a judge to remove Eli from Claire and Grant's home, not for one single day. It asked the court to formally recognize that I was Eli's legal mother of record, that no valid termination of my parental rights had ever occurred, and that the state's Vital Records Office should correct the file accordingly. Legally, notice of that petition had to be served on all interested parties, which meant Claire and Grant, formally, in writing, by a process server, exactly the way any other legal notice in any other case gets delivered. I could have had it mailed. I could have had it served quietly on a Tuesday afternoon at their house while Eli was at school. I thought about doing it that way for almost a week. But my family had spent 17 years managing this truth behind closed doors, deciding in kitchens and hospital rooms and quiet phone calls exactly how much of it anyone else got to know, and exactly when. I had watched them do it to Tyler. I had watched them do it to me. I was done letting them decide, one more time, where and how this particular truth was allowed to land. Eli's 18th birthday was the last Saturday in April, a backyard party at my parents' house because Vivian still hosted everything that mattered, and I told our process server, a retired county deputy named Frank Ostrowski, who Renata used for exactly this kind of situation, that he could serve the papers there, in front of the whole family, the same way the secret had been kept in front of the whole family for 17 years. I spent the 2 weeks before that party rehearsing with Naomi on her back porch, the same way I imagine some of you have watched other people in this position rehearse before. She made me say it out loud 4 separate times, because the first 3 versions still sounded like I was apologizing for existing. You didn't do anything wrong here, Nora, she told me. Stop talking like you're the one who needs forgiveness. I packed Ruth Okafor's card and pamphlet, 17 years old and soft at the folds, into my bag alongside the county clerk's letter and a copy of the filed petition. 3 items. I'd learned a long time ago, both from my job and from watching my own family operate, that the truth lands hardest when you let it arrive item by item instead of all at once. The party was exactly what you'd expect. A rented bounce house nobody under 12 actually used, a sheet cake from the good bakery in town, string lights Walt had spent all Friday hanging along the back fence. Vivian was in her element, moving between coolers and card tables, telling anyone who'd listen that this family had weathered everything life could throw at it without ever once needing anybody from the outside to fix things for them. She was mid-sentence on that exact point, champagne raised for a toast to Eli's future, when the doorbell rang. She kept smiling for exactly 4 more seconds. I counted them. Then Walt went to answer it, and came back looking confused, with Frank Ostrowski behind him holding a clipboard and an envelope, asking politely for Claire Whitfield. Claire stepped forward automatically, the way she'd stepped forward as Eli's mother for 17 years at every doctor's office and school registration desk in his life. Frank shook his head, gently, and looked past her, toward me. Actually, ma'am, I need Vanessa. I have a legal notice to serve regarding a parentage petition. He said my name the way you'd say the name printed on an official document, because that's exactly what it was. The backyard went quiet the specific way a room goes quiet when everyone in it is trying to understand a sentence that doesn't fit the day they thought they were having. I walked forward and signed for the envelope, the way I'd watched 100 other people sign for 100 other pieces of paper that changed the entire shape of their lives. What is this? Claire's voice had gone thin. Vivian's champagne glass was still raised, forgotten, catching the porch light. It's a petition, I said. I filed it in February. It asks the court to formally recognize that I'm Eli's legal mother, because no adoption was ever actually finalized. Nobody's rights get terminated tonight. Nobody's taking Eli anywhere. This just puts on paper what's already been true since the day he was born. My mother's face did something I had spent 17 years imagining and had never quite pictured accurately until I saw it happen for real. Not shock exactly, but the particular unraveling of a woman who had spent 2 decades believing she had closed a door permanently, only to discover the hinges had never actually been screwed in. That's not possible, Vivian said. We signed papers. Bev notarized everything. This has been settled since he was 4 days old. I set my bag on the picnic table and opened it. Bev notarized a private agreement, I said. A notary isn't a judge, Mom. Nobody ever filed anything with a family court. There's no case number because there was never a case. I laid the first item on the table, the county clerk's letter, dated 3 weeks earlier, confirming no adoption decree existed under Eli's name. Claire already found this part out in January. She just didn't know yet what it meant. Claire's hand went to her mouth. Grant put his arm around her, silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read yet. I laid the second item down beside it, Ruth Okafor's card and the folded pamphlet, soft and yellowed at every crease. A hospital social worker gave me this 2 days after Eli was born, I said. She told me, alone, without Mom in the room, that a private agreement wasn't the same as a court finalization. I was 19. I didn't understand it yet. I've had it in my bag ever since, in case I ever did. You've known, Vivian said, and her voice had gone somewhere past anger into something closer to fear. You've known this whole time and you let us believe. I let you show me what you'd already decided to believe, I said. I didn't draft a private agreement instead of going to family court. I didn't tell a 20-year-old that leaving me was the loving thing to do. I only waited until I understood, completely, what actually happened, so nobody in this yard could tell me later that I'd imagined it. I laid the third item down last, because you saved the heart for the end. The filed petition itself, court stamp in the corner, hearing date 3 weeks out. This doesn't ask a judge to take Eli anywhere, I said, loud enough for everyone at that party to hear it clearly. It asks the court to write down what's already true, that I am his mother, that I never stopped being his mother, that the decision made in this family 17 years ago was never actually a legal one. It was just one nobody thought I was allowed to question. Nobody spoke. Frank Ostrowski, to his credit, had stepped quietly back toward the gate, the way people do when they realize the delivery they were hired for has become the least important part of the moment happening in front of them. My mother found her voice first, and it came out exactly the way I'd expected, over 17 years of imagining this conversation. Not soft, not sorry. You're not ready. Claire could give him the life you couldn't. The same sentence, word for word. 17 years old and still the only argument she had. I was 19, I said. I was ready enough to want to try. You made sure I never got to. Claire was crying now, not the composed kind, the real kind. You told me she chose this, she said to Vivian, and her voice cracked on the word chose. You told me Tyler left on his own. You told me she wanted us to have him. She turned to me, and I watched 17 years of a story she'd believed about herself start to come apart at the seams. Did you ever want to keep him? Every year, I said. I wanted to keep him every single year. That was never the part that was up to me. Grant spoke for the first time all evening, quiet, careful, the way engineers talk when they're finally allowed to say the thing they've been calculating silently for a while. I always wondered why Tyler never once tried to reach out over the years, he said. Now I know it wasn't that he didn't want to. He looked at Vivian when he said it, not unkindly, but not gently either. Eli had been standing at the edge of the patio the whole time, 18 years old as of that exact morning, holding a paper plate with a slice of untouched cake, watching all of this land the way you'd watch weather roll in that nobody had warned you about. He set the plate down on the table, next to my 3 documents, and looked at me, really looked, in a way I don't think anyone in that family had let him look at me in years. Why didn't you ever just tell me? He asked. Not accusing, just asking, the way you ask a question you've been carrying without knowing its shape. I wasn't allowed to, I said. I am now. He nodded slowly, and then he did something I will remember for the rest of my life. He picked up Ruth Okafor's old pamphlet from the table, turned it over once in his hands, careful, the way you handle something you can tell is fragile even before anyone tells you why, and set it back down exactly where it had been. Okay, he said. Okay. I'd like to actually get to know you, not instead of Mom. Just also. My father, Walt, hadn't said a word this entire time. He'd stood by the gate with his hands in his pockets, the way he always did when Vivian had the floor. But he crossed the yard now, slowly, and stood beside me, and put his hand on my shoulder, the first time he'd touched me with any real intention in longer than I could remember. I should have said something 17 years ago, he said, quiet enough that it was almost just for me. I knew it wasn't right. I let your mother decide it anyway. I'm sorry, Nora. That's not enough, but it's true. Vivian's face cracked, just once, just for a second. Not performance, something real and frightened underneath. And then it closed back over, fast, the way a wound closes before a person is ready to let it heal. This doesn't change anything, she said. He's grown up in that house. He calls Claire Mom. I'm not asking him to stop, I said. I never once filed this to take Eli out of the only home he's known. I filed it so that the next time somebody in this family decides to explain my life back to me, they have to do it with the actual facts in the room, instead of the version that was convenient 17 years ago. I closed my bag over the 3 documents. I don't want a courtroom fight, Mom. I want the truth on paper, and I want you to stop telling me I made a choice you never actually gave me. Vivian opened her mouth once more, and for a moment I braced for another version of the same sentence she'd been repeating since I was 19. But nothing came. For the first time in my entire life, my mother simply had nothing left to say. Nobody clapped. Nobody cried dramatically into anyone's shoulder the way people do in movies. The string lights kept glowing along the back fence, cheerful and completely indifferent to what had just happened underneath them, and somewhere near the cooler, a toddler cousin kept asking, loudly, when the cake was finally getting cut. If you've ever had to prove something on paper that the people who actually loved you never once needed proof of, stay with me, because the weeks after taught me more than the party itself did. I did not stay for cake. I gathered my 3 documents back into my bag, thanked my mother for hosting, because I'd learned a long time ago that leaving with your manners intact costs you nothing and tells the room everything it needs to know. I hugged Eli before I left, the first real hug we'd had in years that wasn't performed for an audience, and I drove home to Richmond with the windows down the whole way, crying for most of it, not from grief. From the plain, specific relief of finally setting down something I had carried alone since I was 19 years old. The hearing was in late May. It took 11 minutes. I sat in the gallery in a gray blazer, the same shade, more or less, as the one I wear to depose opposing witnesses twice a month, And it struck me somewhere around minute 6 that I had spent 11 years helping other people stand in rooms exactly like this one, and had never once let myself imagine standing in it for my own name. The judge reviewed the filed petition, the county clerk's letter, and Ruth Okafor's original hospital documentation, which Renata had tracked down through the hospital's records department, still on file after 17 years, because some institutions, it turns out, keep better records than families do. The judge signed an order establishing legal parentage in my name and directing the state to correct Eli's vital records accordingly. Nobody contested it. There was, legally, nothing to contest. Claire called me the week after, and for the first time in 17 years, she didn't sound like she was managing me. She sounded like she was actually talking to me. "I keep thinking about what I would have done at 19, she said. "I don't think I would have been as strong as you were." I told her she didn't need to be strong at 19. Neither of us should have had to be. She asked at the end of that call if she could tell Eli eventually, not just the legal parts, but the parts about Tyler, about what Mom had actually said to him. I told her that was something I wanted to give him myself, when he was ready to hear all of it directly from me. "That's fair," she said. "That should be yours to give him." It was the first time in 17 years my sister had ever handed something back to me instead of asking me for something. We've talked more in the 2 months since that party than we did in the previous 10 years combined. My mother has not apologized. She sent one text in June. "This whole situation has been very hard on this family," that I read once and did not answer. I don't expect an apology from her, honestly, and I've stopped organizing my life around waiting for one. My father calls me every other Sunday now, and the calls run longer than they used to, because we're both a little more honest in them these days than we've ever managed to be before. Eli and I have had dinner 3 times since his birthday. He's asked me questions I spent 17 years assuming I'd never get to answer. What Tyler was like, whether I look like my grandmother, what I named him for. I told him the truth every time, plainly, the way I wish someone had told me the truth when I was 19, and looking for anyone at all to simply tell me what my rights actually were. He's applying to a college 2 hours from Richmond in the fall. He's already asked if he can stay with me for a weekend sometime before he leaves. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Naomi met him for the first time over milkshakes in June, and afterwards she told me he asked more good questions in 90 minutes than most of our actual clients manage in a first consultation. Renata, when I told her that, just said, "Sounds like he takes after his mother," and didn't clarify which one she meant, because for the first time in 17 years, it didn't need clarifying at all. Here's what 17 years of reading other people's family paperwork, and one Saturday of finally reading my own back to the people who wrote it, taught me. A signature at a kitchen table isn't the same thing as a decision made freely. And a family that tells you what you chose, instead of ever actually asking you, is telling you a story about themselves, not about you. It took me until I was 36 to say that out loud in a yard full of people who'd spent 17 years hoping I never would. I don't regret how long it took. I only regret that it took a doorbell, instead of a family, to finally make room for the truth. If you've ever had a family hand you a decision and call it a choice, comment, "I know the difference, so I know you're still with me." And if this one landed the way I think it did, share it with somebody who's been carrying their own quiet folder of proof, waiting for the right room to finally set it down in. I'll see you in the next one.